Welcome to the Israel Watch. The commencement of the ceasefire agreement implementation in Gaza and its implications for the Israeli entity, as well as Israeli concerns about releasing Palestinian prisoners from Israeli prisons out of fear they might return to the Palestinian resistance, were among the prominent topics covered by the Hebrew media. We discussed these topics in this episode with Leila Hatoum, Editor-in-Chief, MENA Uncensored. Hello and welcome, Leila. It's always nice having you on our show.
Always a pleasure.
The beginning of the implementation of the first phase of the agreement on the ceasefire in Gaza and the exchange of captives has been a subject of commentary in Hebrew media, which highlighted the ongoing threat posed in the Gaza Strip 15 months after the war of annihilation attributed to Hamas, according to one Israeli commentator.
אתה יודע, יום התפרצות של רגשות שכמוה לא הייתה מאז ה-7 באוקטובר בקיבוץ רוחמה. שם הם חיכו, וכשהם שמעו ששתי החטופות חוזרות, פשוט הייתה שם שמחה מטורפת, כולל ריקודים ושירים, חגיגה אמיתית, כמובן לצד העובדה שיש להם עוד חטופים שעוד לא חזרו הביתה, אבל הם לא יכלו לעצור את השמחה הכל כך גדולה אחרי המתח העצום שהיה שם לאורך החודשים האחרונים. המשפחות שאני מדבר איתן מספרות על כך שהבנות באופן יחסי נראות טוב ובמצב סביר, וזאת בשורה טובה, ולצד זה צריך לומר, זה שלב ראשון, וזה אדרנלין, ונצטרכו לעבור תהליך ארוך מאוד. כאן בעוטף זה עין אחת שמסתכלת בשמחה גדולה על החטופות שחוזרות הביתה ועל התקווה שעוד יחזרו, והעין השנייה מסתכלת לצד השני של הגדר ורואה את המחבלים של חמאס ואת העובדה שהאיום עוד כאן, ולכן אתה שומע היום אמירה ברורה, חייב לסיים, להחזיר את כל החטופים והחטופות הביתה, ואחרי זה לא תהיה ברירה, חייב להשמיד את חמאס כדי להסיר את האיום. עם איום כזה אי אפשר לחיות אחרי ה-7 באוקטובר.
Leila, to begin with, in your opinion, what has the Israeli entity lost in this ceasefire agreement, aside by the joy, let's say, of the settlers in the return of the captives?
Well, you have to understand that the Israelis lost everything, be it internally or externally. Mm-hmm. On the external level, they have exposed their true face to the world. Nobody believes them anymore, yes. And nobody can justify their actions anymore. In the past, some propaganda would be able to quell people from actually standing by the Palestinian side. Now everybody knows what the Israelis are all about. When it comes to the internal front, they are more divided than before. People who have lost prisoners of war who were held by Hamas, those are not hostages.
Yes.
Those are IOF reservists, Israeli Occupation Force reservists, and soldiers and settlers. Settlers are not civilians.
But many says that Hamas has been severely weakened.
Well, you saw yesterday, we saw Hamas fighters and even the elite forces all over, not only Central and South Gaza, but also the Northern Gaza Strip. This is where the Israelis have said that they had eradicated Hamas. Mm-hmm. And suddenly the release of the 3 Israeli prisoners of war, the females, they were released from North Gaza. And that sends a clear message to the world that Hamas was not eradicated in North Gaza, that they continue to hold on to the prisoners of war. The Israelis were not able to liberate them. And the Israeli public clearly saw that their government was unable to fulfill any of the promises or goals that they had set from the beginning.
Yes, and they even were released in good trucks, and there was certain image that Hamas was actually trying to prevail here. The Israeli reporter in the report points to the continued threat posed by Hamas on the settlements, especially on the settlements surrounding the Gaza Strip, and even after 15 months of this ongoing war. What does this indicate in your opinion, Elena?
Well, if that's not a clear confession that Hamas is still there and strong enough, I don't know what is. He's saying that Hamas continues to pose a threat to the Gaza enclave settlements. Now, you do have radicals in the Israeli government among the population as well who support them. People who support Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they want to eradicate Gaza. They want to take over Gaza and annex it as well. And basically, they want the return of the former settlements that they dismantled back in 2005, 2006. We're talking about 16 settlements that formed Rosh Qatif. So at the end of the day, when they speak about threats, that paves the way for the Israeli occupation forces to carry out further attacks against the Palestinians during the not so permanent ceasefire.
Yes.
It's basically temporary. And they will use that as an excuse. We have a security threat, so we shot back. This is what they did in South Lebanon and what they continue to do. This is what they will do in Gaza, taking the excuse that they are under threat to attack Palestinians, even if there's a ceasefire.
Hamas still holds civil and military authority in the Gaza Strip, as shown by the scenes that followed the commencement of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. This was noted by one of the Hebrew media correspondents.
אני חושב שלצד התמונות האלו, בסופו של דבר, מה שצריך לזכור זו העובדה, ונתעלם מהדברים שאנשים אומרים בחדרים סגורים או ברחוב, העובדה שחמאס נשאר בשלטון, גם צבאית, גם בוודאי אזרחית, וזו השורה התחתונה, כאשר זו הדרך שבה ישראל נכנסת לתוך ההסכם הזה, לתוך הפסקת האש הזו, מבלי שמוטטה את חמאס, מבלי שהושגו מטרות המלחמה, וכאשר לחמאס יש עכשיו את ההזדמנות, עם הפסקת האש הזו נשמרת, להשתקם מחדש, בוודאי ובוודאי, גם להפגין באופן פומבי מאוד את השליטה שלו על האוכלוסייה, לא מן הנמנע שנראה גם הוצאות להורג בפומבי, דברים שאנחנו רואים מחמאס באופן קבוע.
Okay, you were highlighting the point that I'm going to actually ask you now. How, with Hamas not been defeated in Gaza, in your own opinion, how will the Israelis deal with the situation over there? Do you think there will be an on-off escalation?
There will always be an on-off escalation, especially when you have an occupation and natives that are being oppressed. There will be a resistance versus an occupation, and you'll see it recurring every now and then. But for the time being...
But not on a wider scale.
Yeah, I mean, for the near future, Hamas was not defeated, but it was weakened. At the end of the day, they have to take care of their people who got injured, those who were killed and they still haven't found their bodies, and the amputees, among other things. And they have to rebuild their military capacity. They are still in power, as he said, military-wise and service-wise. We saw policemen actually organizing the traffic yesterday and the day before. But you have to understand one thing. When it comes to Hamas, they have nothing to lose until now. And the most dangerous of opponents is the one that has nothing left to lose. And after everything that happened, the Israelis know that Hamas next time will be coming with a vengeance if the Israelis continue to breach any agreement. Now, the Israelis, they think that they are still above everybody else, the chosen people, you know? Yes. But at the end of the day, the international community, to what extent it's going to support them going forward, that's a big question mark. Hamas will stay in power. The Israelis will try to breach agreements as they always do. This is their nature.
Yes.
But Hamas will not be silent about it.
So do you think that the ceasefire agreement serves the Palestinian resistance interest or that of the Israelis?
Well, I have to be very fair. It serves the Palestinian interests, but at what cost? That's the big question. I mean, peace doesn't come cheap or free. So 46,000 people who were martyred, and it's up to 50,000, 55,000 because there are still bodies that we haven't found under the rubble. It's a very steep price to pay, but it served the Palestinian cause highly because it actually brought it back to the forefront of people's minds across the world. People had forgotten about the Palestinian state even, like not even the cause. And now everybody's talking about the Palestinian state. They're trying to push the Israelis for a Palestinian state. And remember, a Palestinian state is actually a nightmare for Eretz Yisrael, or the land of Israel, as they call it.
Yes.
So they don't want that, and the international community now is pushing for it. So it served the Palestinian cause. When it comes to the Israelis, it served them in the sense that they have weakened the resistance for some time. Now they can actually focus on basically how to impose certain limitations to that resistance for the near future and the medium term. They know they cannot eradicate them, so they have to deal with them.
But they promised to eradicate them, and these were the promises made by the Netanyahu cabinet.
They also promised to return all the hostages. They started killing them with the Hannibal doctrine. So the Israelis, when they promise something, that doesn't mean basically that they are going to fulfill their words. They lied to their own public, and they got exposed in front of their own public. When they actually killed hostages, they didn't care about them, and now they couldn't release the hostages without a ceasefire agreement. It's not like basically through a military operation, it's through a ceasefire agreement.
So you're actually saying that they were obliged or they were forced into a ceasefire agreement?
Of course. The Israelis
by the Americans, by Trump and Biden, or by the force that was applied by the Palestinian resistance?
Well, all three together. You have to understand, Hamas stood its ground, and that forced the Israelis. It put immense not only military pressure but also economic pressure on the Israeli entity and its economy. At the same time, you had Joe Biden, who was against Netanyahu. He was pro-Benny Gantz, and he was trying to bring him into power. He was rallying the people against him. So basically, he was putting pressures on Netanyahu to stop the war. Netanyahu knew the game very well. If he stops the war, he will be taken to court.
Yes.
Trump.
And that's why he was trying to postpone the entire situation.
Of course.
And despite the commencement of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza and the captive exchange process, there are still calls within the Israeli entity to return to war on Gaza. A Hebrew media military analyst considered this a highly challenging matter.
לגבי חזרה ללחימה, כן, זה אירוע הרבה יותר קשה. אנחנו רואים מה מחיר הדמים עכשיו בג'באליה ובח'אן יונס. ראינו שנהרגו לנו ב8 ימים 15 לוחמים. זה הרבה יותר קשה, הרבה יותר מורכב. צה"ל פרוס בכל כך הרבה גזרות, וזה לא באותה נקודת פתיחה שבה היינו למשל בהפסקת האש הקודמת. ולכן המחיר הוא הרבה יותר כבד, והעסקה הזו היא לא טובה, אנחנו צריכים לשלם אותה, כי הסתבכנו, כי הצבא לצורך העניין נכשל והפקיר את בנינו ובנותינו. דרג מדיני, הצבא גם לא הביא הישג כמו שצריך ולא מוטט את חמאס. הדרג המדיני לא הביא פתרון שלטוני וחלופה שלטונית לחמאס, והגענו לנקודה הזאת שאנחנו בהסכם רע, אבל אין מה לעשות, צריך להציל אותם.
Leila, what is behind the ongoing calls to return to war on Gaza, whether by the Netanyahu cabinet or by even officials and prominent officials within the Israeli authorities?
Well, you have to understand, Trump, before this whole war and escalation happened, he was subject to trial for corruption, among other things, usurping power, etc. And he knows that the moment that they have a permanent ceasefire or an actual ceasefire deal, that means the end of war. It will be the end of war. He will be ushered back to the court. He hasn't achieved anything on the ground, like Greater Israel or anything else, to take with him to court to tell his people, well, I managed to do this to you, I'm a hero, so you can't try me. So if this ceasefire materializes, it will actually be against his own interests and against the interests of the officials who supported him. That's why Netanyahu said 2 days before the ceasefire, he said, even if we have a ceasefire agreement, we will continue the fight on the ground. So he doesn't care. He wants that fight to continue so he can protect himself.
Okay. The Israeli commentator, and as we've seen in the report, talks about the failure of Netanyahu's cabinet to find an alternative to Hamas's authority in Gaza. In your opinion, has the Israeli cabinet indeed failed in this regard?
Well, any sort of chaos when it comes to ruling Gaza serves the Israeli entity. But when you find Hamas still in control in Gaza, that's when you know that Netanyahu's government has failed.
And they spoke a lot about alternatives.
Of course, they spoke about the PA, but not alone, by the way. When they spoke about the PA taking over the day after the war, they said, and it should have foreign partners with it. So basically, at the end of the day, those who are going to rule or govern for the interim phase, Gaza, those will not be Palestinians, and if it's the PA, it will follow the dictations of the outside world. And that's really sad. Hamas will not agree to that. People who had given sacrifices on the ground, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza will not accept that. And that will basically usher another phase of what you call unrest. And that will pose a threat to the Israeli enclave settlements, the Gaza enclave settlements around Gaza.
And how will this move, the failure by the Netanyahu's cabinet to actually find an alternative to Hamas authority in the Gaza Strip, actually be faced within the Israeli community, that it's not, you neither weakened Hamas nor actually found an alternative for this group?
This is why I said there's a big divide in the Israeli entity at the moment that's more severe than before. People have seen how much of a failure Bibi Netanyahu is. They used to call him Melech Bibi, King Bibi. He used to sell them words, right? But towards the end of the day, Netanyahu showed the world that he cannot fulfill any of his promises, and his people are now seeing that. So it created a divide against him, and they know very well that if he carries down that path, it will be their end. The threat will move away from Gaza towards where they are. It's not only the Gaza enclave settlements.
In your opinion, can we analyze that they didn't find an alternative is due to the fact that they are still willing to actually engage in a war against Hamas?
Netanyahu doesn't want to find an alternative. He wants that war to continue raging. He wants that chaos to continue.
He wants a pretext.
Exactly. Whereas the rest of the Israeli community, along with the Israeli opposition, they want that rest so they can pull out their soldiers. They can actually have what you call a study or an investigation of what happened and then blame it on Netanyahu. And Netanyahu doesn't want that. So whenever you have a state of chaos, it benefits Netanyahu's case. Mm-hmm. Whenever you have more peaceful or basically stable solution in Gaza and even in the West Bank, that's against Netanyahu's pretext to actually take over more land or create more wars to protect himself.
Okay. However, the biggest issue with the Gaza ceasefire agreement is the Palestinian captives who will be released from Israeli prisons. The Hebrew media revealed discussions within the Israeli security establishment on how to deal with the Palestinian captives after their release and where they should be kept under surveillance to prevent the return to resistance activities.
במערכת הביטחון תומכים חד משמעית בעסקה המתגבשת, ובכל זאת ניסיון העבר מלמד אותנו שאותם מחבלים, גם רוצחים שמשתחררים, חוזרים לפעילות טרור וחוזרים לרצוח. עכשיו מתנהל דיון במערכת הביטחון, לאן כדאי לשחרר את אותם מרצחים. מצד אחד, ממשלת ישראל הודיעה שהיא לא תשחרר את המרצחים ליהודה ושומרון. מצד שני, אני שומעת דווקא בכירים מאוד במערכת הביטחון שטוענים שיהיה קל יותר אם הם יהיו ביהודה ושומרון, כי אז יהיה ניתן להגיע להם, והם לא יצמחו לטרור כפי שראינו עם יחיא סינואר למשל. ואני חושבת שזה באמת, זו הנקודה המשמעותית. האבן הנגף והבעיה המשמעותית בהסכם הזה היא שחרור אותם מרצחים, וחוששת לנו ולילדים שלנו, אם מערכת הביטחון לא תדע להשכיל לטפל באותם מרצחים. ותסלחו לי, ניסיון העבר לא מרמז טובות.
How much will the release of Palestinian captives, and we're speaking about high-profile Palestinian captives, be of benefit to the Palestinian resistance?
Well, first of all, it's a moral victory for them. When you have the high-profile Palestinians who the Israelis had refused to release for years, and some of them for decades, go out, that means that they have scored something against the Israeli entity, no matter what. It also helps when you have leaders among those who were released or are released that unite people together. We're talking about Barghouti, we're talking about Mrs. Jarrar, who was, Majda Jarrar, she was released yesterday.
And she was released
and
yesterday.
You saw how everybody was going around her. Those people are icons that transcend PA
but
or
does
Hamas.
this make up for the loss of great leaders such as Sinwar?
Nothing makes up for the loss of great leaders and strategists like Sinwar, and even in Lebanon like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it's a price that they knew that they will have to pay one day, and they were willing to do it. If they are willing to do it, who are we to say that basically this price is too steep and we cannot basically accept it or it's too hard? At the end of the day, they have what you call set up people in the second tier and third tier leadership who would carry on the way. Yes, it is hard to replace them, but it's a price of freedom. It's not free and it's not basically cheap.
Okay. So how will the release of these Palestinians that we're actually speaking about be of benefit to the Palestinian resistance? Will they be actually...
It will give them a push, not only morally, but also military-wise, because the resistance will tell the world, look, we managed to do this only through an act of resistance. So power needs power. Diplomacy doesn't work in this case.
Okay, and another question, how do you think the occupation will actually deal with the released Palestinians captives? We heard we heard a lot of stories about relocating. They will be relocating some of them, in your opinion?
Well, some of them were released on the condition that they will be moved, let's say, for example, to Gaza or elsewhere, Jordan, Egypt, and even the West Bank, certain areas, they cannot leave those areas. But at the end of the day, I mean, the Palestinians will do what the Palestinians have always done over the past 80 years. They will always find a way to regroup. The release of those hostages, Palestinian hostages, I'm going to call them,
yes,
actually will support uniting the Palestinians. And I do believe that certain figures within those who are released will be able to actually hold the resistance and the PA together in one form and unite people around them with that. Unity is very important for the Palestinians.
Especially at this time, specifically. Exactly. Okay, staying on the same topic, a former official responsible for the captives case in the Israeli army confirmed that the issue of releasing symbolic Palestinian captives is a thorny matter given past experiences, proving that these captives will most probably return to leading resistance after their release.
כן, אמר לי, הדינמיקה הזו היא דינמיקה משברית שאנחנו מכירים אותם גם מעסקאות עבר. זאת אומרת, חמאס פה מאמץ פרקטיקות מוכרות של ארגוני טרור, גם ירש את זה מהחיזבאללה. אנחנו מכירים שבישורת האחרונה יש איזה ניסיון לסחיטה. סחיטה היא לא בכדי אחד המרכיבים המוכרים של גורמי הטרור, והנושא הזה של העיסוק בווטו או בשאלת הסמל היא נושא קריטי לארגוני הטרור. זאת אומרת, מעבר לשחרור של המסות של האנשים שרובם, חוץ משפחות המפגעים, הקורבנות כמובן שהחוו פה חוויה קשה, רובם הם לא סמלים. יש כאן כמה וכמה שמות שאת חלקם אנחנו מכירים בציבוריות. אני יכול להזכיר מעסקאות עבר דמויות שכן היה בהם דיון ציבורי רועם, כמו מוסטפא דיראני בעסקת טננבאום, או כמו סמיר קונטר בעסקת גולדווסר רגב. הנושא הזה של סמלים הוא קריטי לחמאס, בעיקר כדי לייצר פן.
How significant is the release of high Palestinian captives in the propaganda psychological war dimension, Leila?
If the Palestinians play it very well, they will show the world that these figures were held for the longest time by the Israeli occupation for no reason. Some of them have been on what you call administrative detention without even any accusation for a long time. Some of them basically were accused of really things that, normal people do in their own countries. Remember, he has been trying to portray the Israelis as victims versus the Israeli prisoners of war versus the Palestinian hostages whom he called terrorists. This is the Israeli propaganda. Whoever they release, be it an innocent person, a leader or non-leader, they will always be terrorists in the eyes of the Israelis, and this is how they're trying to portray them. It is in the Palestinian favor now to play on the media game and show the world that those who were released were actual resistance figures, were actual leaders, were actual civil society people who were trying to unite the Palestinians and the Israelis.
But can they succeed in the media game? Because the other side have the upper hand.
Now they have the support of the international community. International media, and I'm talking about traditional media, but I'm talking about the mass media, new media, social media. Everybody has understood the game that the Israelis were trying to play.
Yes, and the social media played a very important role and a pivotal role throughout.
Of course. Who tried to debunk and managed to debunk the Israeli propaganda from day one? It was actually people on social media, independent reporters, people who actually know the truth and who managed to reach the world through social media.
But do you think that this is having a practical impact on the ground?
Well, it will debunk the Israeli narrative, and it will show the world that these people that the Israelis are trying to paint as terrorists are actually people who are uniting figures for the Palestinians, and the Israelis were preventing the unity among Palestinians so they can continue to prevail. Mm-hmm. This will help morally across the world, and then the population, when you start awakening them, they will move against their governments. It takes time. Nobody said it's going to happen overnight, but it will help the Palestinians going forward.
And of course, Gaza or even Hamas authorities, they actually, through Al-Qassam Brigade, they actually try to capture the attention of people by the way that they released the 3 Israeli settlers or captives yesterday. They looked good. They actually acted with them in a very nice perspective, unlike Haddad, as you highlighted, how she was released, and she's a high-profile Palestinian figure, how she was released and the condition that she was released at. Jarrar, yes, Jarrar. So that's exactly how the Hamas is trying to actually prevail the image. And what's the reason behind it?
Well, definitely, if we go to the first commentator, when he said that they were looking good, in a good condition, they were treated well, that tells the world who actually is humane and who's not. The Israelis, when they release Palestinian prisoners, they have lost weight, they are tortured. Some of them basically have permanent what you call injuries. When it comes to the Israeli side, the Israeli prisoners of war, Hamas had fed them, taken care of their medication, and protected them even with their lives.
Yes.
Hamas's elite team had been actually sacrificing their lives to protect these prisoners of war when the Israelis were trying to bombard them and kill them. And this happened over the course of 15 months. We saw that. Even Abu Ubaidah, the spokesperson basically for Hamas on the ground, the military wing, he actually pointed out to the fact that the Israelis are trying to kill the prisoners of war, whereas the Palestinians were trying to protect them. Mm-hmm. That tells the world one thing. The ones who are anti-life are the Israelis. The ones who are trying to protect life and they are not aggressors are the Palestinians.
And we have even seen images yesterday of Palestinian prisoners handcuffed, returned to her own home within her own family. Do you believe that more high-profile Palestinian prisoners will be released in the coming days?
If the Israelis don't find a pretext to breach that ceasefire massively, because at the moment they have been breaching it since day one. Over 111 Palestinians were killed yesterday. They got martyred by the Israelis on the first day of the ceasefire. Mm-hmm. So if they don't find an excuse to actually stop this ceasefire agreement, and I highly doubt that they're going to do so because Trump wants to appear as the victorious peacemaker and he's pushing it on the Israelis as well, they will be releasing more Palestinian hostages. And I do believe that the lists that they were giving out, we will see more and more Palestinians coming out. Yesterday, they missed out on one of the names of the female hostages.
And it was delayed for 7 hours.
Exactly. And it was through the Palestinians and the international community pressuring the Red Cross and the Israelis that they managed to actually get her out.
Leila Hatoum, Editor-in-Chief, MENA Uncensored, thank you for being with us today. Dear viewers, thank you for watching.